There we go. I'll share my screen.
Oh, okay.
All right.
There we go.
Let me go back up to the very first slide. There we go. All right, take it away.
All right. Today we're going to go over student privacy, Compass, FPF resources. I am Roger Raddatz. My associate is Devon Swartz.
That would be me.
I'm going to start with Student Privacy Communications Toolkit for schools and districts. Schools and districts leaders should be thoughtful and intentional about the way they are trying to achieve the communications about privacy, protection, and responsible data use to both educators and parents. Setting goals for your communication strategy will keep your goal, your message clear and consistent. Some parental goals and supporting tactics to consider include building and maintaining credibility and trust, develop and share an overview of state and federal laws, peer school and district policies, backgrounds on how the school should or district should develop its own policies and how such policies can be put into practice. Record and amplify educator and student success stories with specific ed tech. Provide a feedback mechanism for educators, parents, and students. Communicate the prioritization of privacy by the school and district often. An easy to navigate website is an essential tool for effectively communicating to your school and community. From school principals and administrators to parents, educators, potential third-party vendors about your students' privacy practices. The school or district, as well as educators, will often point to the website when communicating with various stakeholders, so a well-made central resource should serve all these purposes. A website that communicates student privacy well should contain the following information: a link to student privacy and data practices websites available on the homepage, a link to student privacy and data practices website available in the homepage primary navigation menu, a copy of or link to the school or district annual FERPA notice and or the rights of parents and students under FERPA, a copy of the link to the school or district's policy regarding students' data collection, use, retention, sharing, and protection, a copy of or link to the school or district's policy regarding directory information, a copy of or link to the school or district's policy under the protection of pupil rights amendment, information about any acceptable state student privacy law or district policies, a list of educational technology tools being used in the school or district, and information about the process to check those tools for privacy and security protection, a contact page or email address if anyone has questions about the school or district's student privacy policies or practices, resources or training for education and school staff on student privacy, clear, transparent language, including words like will and not hedging words like may or might. Each year, schools and districts should provide notice to parents and guardians regarding students' use of various EdTech tools and platforms. Take this opportunity to clearly communicate with the platforms students will be using, their educational value, and the precautions that the school is taking to safeguard student information against privacy risks that may come with the use of any app or online tool. The content must be for specific tools and cannot be broad permission to share data with any approved third party. FERPA, which applies to all schools regarding receiving funding from the U.S. Department of Education, guarantees parents access to their children's educational records and restricts the parties to whom those schools can disclose the student's educational records without consent. Educators should know that under FERPA, schools are required to obtain parental consent to share information in a student's educational records, which is the case for most ed tech tools, or qualify for an exception. Most ed tech providers receive student information under the school official exception, which requires the school to ensure the ed tech company is doing something for which the school would otherwise use internal staff, has a legitimate interest, is under direct control of the school, and any data is only collected, used, and shared for the original purpose it was collected for. COPPA, which applies to the operators of commercial websites and online services, regulates the collection of information from children under the age of 13. Educators and other school officials, such as district administrators, are authorized to provide consent on behalf of parents for the use of online tools in the context of educational programs. Educators need to know that for this age group, COPPA requires that student information is used solely for the specific educational purpose and not for commercial purposes. To include students as active participants in building a culture of privacy, schools and districts should be transparent about their data governance and student privacy policies and procedures. This includes transparent communication about any monitoring, filtering, or blocking of online content and activities by the school or district, as well as expectations of appropriate use of technology by the students. In this way, transparent privacy policies and standards that outline when, why, and how students are monitored and how their data and school technologies are used to support student learning bolsters trust. This trust extends to the technologies used by schools and districts, the policies and practices that govern the use of these technologies, and intent of teachers, schools, and districts in using technologies that keep students safe online and do not leave them feeling under constant surveillance. Next slide, please. Now, this is about mandating videos. A lot of schools have done this to ensure students are actually there behind the computer. But these are some things you have to think about. Mandating video may require a student to show more of their home life that they are comfortable with. Mandating video may also cause a student to be less active in a class because if they make a mistake, it is recorded. Video from the computer can also be used by second parties that were not intended to have this data. This could be anywhere from their opinion on something to what their household makeup is. Mandating video can give away hints of a student's socioeconomic status in which they really don't want people to know. Sound and video take a lot of bandwidth. This may cause a student not to be able to show video if they want to stay connected to the class. Another negative aspect of mandated videoing is that other classmates could record the session and use it against other students in the form of bullying. Video should not be the only tool used to gauge engagement. Before mandating video, realize that there are other ways to engage students, such as a discussion, quizzes, or using these methods with a pre-recorded class. If one is going to mandate video feeds, explain why to the class. Last of all, teach the students about online privacy and perhaps what is appropriate and not appropriate on video. Next slide, please. Now, this is some things us as teachers can use to help with our privacy and the school's privacy. Data privacy, something you want to think of when working on securing a home-based network is protecting it with a password. This should be no less than 12 characters and have at least 2 uppercase characters, 2 lowercase, 2 numbers, and 2 special characters. Other things that should be investigated are 2-factor authentication and perhaps using a passphrase instead of a password. Cell phones are becoming more and more convenient medium to communicate with others. However, if a teacher gives their personal cell phone information away, they might get unwanted phone calls at bad times. In these cases, apps such as Pronto allow a teacher to talk to students or their parents without giving personal phone information away. Be aware that some apps have location information and can give away your position. When looking at using apps, there are 3 things one should think of. Has the school approved the app? If the app has not been approved, do you know how to go about approving the app? And if the school has no process of approving apps, you can look through FPF's Educator's Guide to Student Data Privacy, especially the checklist of questions on page 10, or look at Common Sense Media Privacy Program, view of websites and applications. Also check out FPF's new publication, Online Learning Best Practices for Schools and Educators During COVID-19. And these can be found at the notes at the bottom of the slides. That is all for me.
All right, I will take it away. So, a big portion of security means and privacy responsibility within our textbook comes in chapter 9, and it talks a lot about accountability versus responsibility. So those 2 things are oftentimes used synonymously with one another, and many people think that they mean the same thing. This, however, is absolutely not the case. I'm going to talk about why. So, accountability can be defined as the ownership of a result or lack thereof produced from a task or anything that was assigned to you to complete. So this could be, for example, let's say a teacher was assigned to, by the end of the quarter, they wanted this teacher to have higher overall scores in a standardized test. So the teacher, if the accountability was on the teacher, we would say then that she is accountable for the outcome, good or bad, of whether or not these students tested better or worse. So the difference between that and responsibility is responsibility can be defined as the ownership of the actions or lack thereof that take place to produce that result. So when we say in the same example that a teacher is assigned with hopefully raising the standardized test scores in 1/4 of all of their students. So instead of being responsible, I should choose my words better because we're talking about these 2 things. Instead of being in charge of getting these scores raised, the teacher would then be responsible for how to get to that point. We know what the goal is. The goal is to have higher test scores, but how do we get there? What do we do to get there? That is the responsibility that falls on the teacher. And in this example, the teacher is both responsible for the actions that they take towards getting these students to test better and accountable for the results after the standardized tests have all been taken by the students. So the accountability portion of this example, there could be extrinsic consequences or rewards based on the outcome. And what that means is, let's say the teacher could potentially receive a 3% raise into the coming year on their contract if they get a substantially better over the board standardized test rate. So that is extrinsic. That affects you physically. That affects this teacher physically. They're getting a raise, and we all want that. That's a great goal to work towards if you can manage to get the outcome that is positive for not only the teacher but the students. So when you're responsible for the actions that produce the result, those consequences and rewards are much more intrinsic. So in this example, if the teacher did not end up getting the higher test scores at the end of the quarter, they could look inward and think, well, did I do everything that I could have done to help these students test better? Could I have done more? Or on the flip hand, if the scores were raised, the teacher could think, man, I really did everything that I could. I am proud of myself. It validates me as an educator, and I can work even harder and even better to get these scores higher in the future. So that's just a little bit of the difference between accountability and responsibility. And this can also translate into student privacy. So of course, an educator's outcome in accordance to so many laws like FERPA that have been published to protect student rights is to protect the data or the privacy of a student. So a teacher may find a website that they like to use, and without doing much further research into the website, they could find that the website has been stealing information from the students who have to put in their birthday, name, email, all of these different identifying factors to participate in the activity. Well, maybe that information gets sold, and now they are getting solicitations from their email, or they are at risk of identity theft. So the teacher would then be accountable for that outcome because the teacher did not go and do the proper research. That proper research about a website is the responsibility. So if a teacher goes in and researches and looks at the privacy statements on a website and sees, well, they have a tendency to, or they don't say anything about not selling information, they don't have any privacy guidelines, they're they very much like to be intrusive with how they choose, with how they ask for information. Well, maybe that's a red flag for a teacher, so they shouldn't use that website. So the teacher is responsible for finding out if the website is safe and then implementing it, and they are accountable for whether or not the outcome is a safe outcome or an unsafe outcome. So the Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development, or what we know as ASCD, has recently released several articles and pieces of information about student privacy, especially concerning the times that we live in with the COVID pandemic. A lot of the schooling for last year and the school year beforehand was done virtually. So I'm going to take you through each of these three amazing articles that I found and just briefly talk over them. So the first one is Cybersecurity Guidelines for Remote Learning, and this was posted in July 1st of 2020, so just a few months after the pandemic started. So what this website does really well is, like, again, it's titled Guidelines. It gives us many tips for being safe with our students' data. So on the bullet points right here, it says avoid setting up a video conference system that requires students to create accounts. Now, some do, like if you're using Google Hangouts, that requires you to have a Google account. Even Zoom sometimes will ask you to make an account. You don't have to, I don't think, for this platform, but in order to host a meeting, you definitely do. Remember that audio and video recordings of an individual must be protected in accordance with federal and state laws and your school system's policy. So if we look at it like an upside down triangle for the graph, up here, the largest portion would be the federal laws. That is going to be the main guideline that everyone has to follow. It's the largest part, and it's oftentimes the most vague. And not to say that in and of itself is vague, but it's what sets the standards for states. If we go to the middle portion of this triangle, they can be much more specific in their laws about how they want student privacy to be protected. Now, they can't say that student privacy cannot be protected because that does not fall within the range of the top tier or the top tier. And then we go down to the very bottom of the pyramid, the upside down triangle, and that would be the school system's policies where they can follow strictly what the state and federal laws say, or they can become even stricter. Again, they all follows that shape to where it funnels down, so it can't go outside of the means of the one above it, but it can be stricter, so it can go inside even stricter. So when possible, you want to avoid recording classroom discussions with students. Ask teachers to pre-record their lessons without students' presence, which further minimizes privacy risks to students. And I'll get into this a little bit more specific later, but there have been some data breaches with specific video conferencing apps that have led to compromising information being leaked. So you want to provide information to parents about why you're using the technology and how you're protecting student data privacy. This is very, very, very important, not only for the student security, but for the families to feel like their students' information is secure within the schools. So you want them to understand and know that you're being proactive with their students' information and making sure that it's protected and not being trafficked, sold, or anything like that. You want to give parents the ability to opt their child out of participating in video sessions and have alternative methods available for those students who need it. And Roger touched on this a bit too. There are so many factors going into why maybe families wouldn't want video conferencing to be the primary form of communication. It reveals socioeconomic status. It could be detrimental to people with disabilities. There's so many different factors that go into this, so it should not be required, and there should be an option for parents to opt out of video conferencing just for those reasons. And there's so much more that we can go over, but I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next one, which is the challenge of data privacy. And this one was posted by ASCD in November 1st of 2015. So this was prior to the coronavirus outbreak. And so what this talks about, this article was written in a time where the National Security Association, the NSA, was under heavy scrutiny for collecting private information. And so it talks about all the different things that we can do. So if we see over here underneath the abstract, it says sort of protecting student privacy. And this talks about FERPA and all of the different laws that are enacted, FERPA, COPPA, that help protect students' identity when they're online. And then if we go down to what's the harm, it talks about what can happen if student information is compromised. And we never want that to happen at all. Kept in the dark, that talks about different things and aspects that FERPA cannot really touch on. It hasn't been updated too much, or at least as of this article, for online learning. The safeguards we use, and again, this is just more tips, and it has right here, you'll see the 10 student data principles. Those are just more tips and tricks to making sure that you are being safe with your students' information. And then how to make privacy a priority, especially in today's time. We want to make sure that we are being very, very, very safe with our students' data. Now, as teachers, we don't always have access to everything, and we shouldn't. That's not our information. That's not what we need to know to further their educations. But what we want to do is, even not knowing their information, we want to make sure that we're being safe with it, because even though we may not have access to it, we could facilitate or precipitate some of the actions prior to a more major security breach, and we do not want that at all. And then our last one is power up the updated rules for securing data. And this is from Doug Johnson on November 1st of 2013. So it's a little bit older, but still very, very relevant. And this, again, gives a lot more information about how to be safer with your security. So you want to know the laws and policies that are enacted on the federal, the state, and the district level. You want to use strong passwords. And Roger touched on this too, about having capital letters, characters, maybe even using a phrase instead of one singular word, add numbers. And there are many different apps and resources that you can use to test how safe your password is. You want to use screensavers and device logins. So at my elementary school, Rockville, here in Lewisburg, each student has access to a Chromebook, and each student is given a USD 416 email account in association with Google. So all of them are through Google, but have our domain. And the only thing that we require for that is the first and last name of the student. So for example, if we say John Doe, the email would be doej@usd416.org. And then the only other personal information that has to be put in for that student is their birthday. And we go through steps and take extra security measures to make sure that that birthday and that name isn't leaked irresponsibly. And using screensavers and device logins is a great way for students and not students and teachers, I should say, and staff and just anyone in general to make sure that there is a first stop barrier between you and your private information. On my computer, I have a screensaver, I have a set password. No one can get in unless they know the password. So you want to be also wary of social engineering hacks, and it's a little funny to think about, but as we progress further into the future or further through the present, I should say, technology advances at such a quick rate. But it's so interesting to me that a lot of times information is leaked and data breaches happen with completely without the use of technology. So it'll say right here, the easiest way to obtain someone's password, ask for it. And that happens so frequently. And most people use similar passwords for all their platforms or the same even, which is highly, highly not recommended. So please, if you are coming up with passwords, use different passwords for everything. Make variables in it. Don't just change the numbers or the symbols, do completely different phrases. And never ever give out a password to someone that you do not trust. And that goes with all platforms, Netflix, even your Gmail, your social media passwords. You never ever want to give that out to anyone that you are not 100% trusting. And so hazards created by viruses are another huge thing. And at most schools, I should say, there is a lot of money allocated towards antivirus software put on our computers and our networks, but that doesn't always help. A student or a teacher could click on the wrong link, and that could accidentally download a virus to their computer. And I've actually, previously to working at the school, I worked at an institution where one of our employees accidentally downloaded some malware and it stole all of our clients' information and it was held for ransom. That was not good. We had to go to court to get our information back. Luckily, nothing was compromised because it was all very sensitive information, but you just have to be very wary of what you're clicking on and making sure that you can trust the sources that you're on online and create good backups. So most teachers have so many things saved onto their computer, onto their desktops, onto their folders, but always it's a good idea to always have backups in case anything technical happens, or if in the case that your information is stolen. Dropbox, Google Drive, Microsoft OneDrive, those are all great resources to store backups in the cloud of all of your information. And they're all decently secure. And you want to teach students how to protect their own data too, even the little ones. We always talk about stranger danger, which is kind of an outdated form of social safety, but it's just the point that I'm making right now. It can be correlated to internet safety. You don't want to give out your information to any entity online that is not 100% trustworthy, and you have to teach them what is trustworthy. So moving on back to our presentation, let's look at web searches and personal experiences and insights. So I have talked about this in previous assignments before, but when I was in high school, my information was actually breached from a teacher. I was in high school. It was my science teacher. And so my family is not the typical family that you see. It's not a nuclear family. My parents are divorced and my mother's remarried. And then he also split up from a relationship where they had a child. So to make a very, very long story short, one of the parties involved that was not on our side of a custody battle befriended my high school teacher and his wife and began asking inappropriate questions about like our address, our grades, our attendance records, and even got him to got my teacher to give her our social security information and stuff like that. And that we had to go to the cops about that. They were concerned about identity theft. And unfortunately, no measures were taken to prevent that from happening again. The teacher is still employed at the district, but all's well that ends well. My identity was never stolen. We had put protective measures in place, but that's just an instance of something that could happen that could be very detrimental to a student's identity. So online and virtual learning and privacy. So we all know that Zoom, which is the platform we're using right now, has become widely used in education, and not only education, but many other business areas as well. So back in, and I'll open this app or this website so we can look. back in April, Zoom had a major data breach where you can see on the screen, hackers got a hold of 500,000 passwords and access to accounts. So the credentials, usernames, passwords, those are all available to be sold, traded, bought. And so that led to huge confidentiality breaches, and Zoom actually wasn't used for a while, very as at the same level that it is right now. But with every incident like this, there is a silver lining. Zoom has now become one of the most secure and trusted video conferencing apps on the market. So they've put in many more security measures, and other apps like Cisco WebEx, Google Hangouts have all learned from the mistakes of what happened with Zoom and built upon their security progress. So again, this is a very unfortunate thing that happened, that so much data was breached, but silver linings, that just showed them ways to improve, and they did improve and have not suffered a similar incident since then. And then we are finished with our presentation. Here are the resources that we used. Roger, I don't know if you want to talk about any specific ones, but you'll see the bottom half from ascd.org down. Those are all of the resources that I use. So please feel free to look at those and read through them in more depth at your own discretion. Roger, do you have anything to say about your resources?
They're all found in the FPF website. They're all good data protection practices.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you very much. And we are going to sign off.